You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer podcast, where each week we have insightful conversations with higher ed professionals dedicated to enhancing the field of marketing and enrollment. My name is Troy Singer, and as always, here with my friend and the co-host of this podcast, Bart Kaler. Today, we are thrilled to explore a transformational topic with one of our friends and guests who's making waves in both enrollment and athletics at Hartwick College.
Yeah, today we talked to Dr. Bryan Gross. He's the Vice President of Enrollment Management and Athletics at Hartwick College. I just think that it's such a great conversation. I really enjoy every time I'm with Bryan. He's such an insightful and articulate guy. And I just think that what they're doing at Hartwick, especially if you're at a small private or a medium private, they've got some really good things going on. We talk a little bit about some of the ways that they're repositioning some ways of positioning the school, talking about, some strategic things they've been implementing into a 3-year plan. They're in year 2 of that. And we talk about tuition reset, as well as just the idea of what that means when you talk to families for financial aid, what that means, how it relates to athletics. So it's just a really packed conversation that has just got so many good takeaways and nuggets that I think that you can really study and take back to your institution.
It's a fascinating strategy, and it's grounded in both research and collaboration across campus. I'd also want to mention, you'll hear this, but Dr. Gross is a podcast pro. He has his own podcast called Visionary Voices, which we encourage you to listen to. And without further ado, here's our conversation with Dr. Bryan Gross. Bryan, we are so happy to be having this conversation with you. And before we get into the meat of the conversation, we always start our conversations with this question. If you could please share something that you've learned recently that you would think falls into the either interesting or new and exciting category.
Great. I love that question because I had a school counselor luncheon today. And of course, top on their mind was the FAFSA and financial aid timelines. And so I actually learned today that testing in the Department of Education for the FAFSA is going extremely well. And we expect that the FAFSA will be available to students on December 1st. But what is really miraculous coming off of last year is that they were giving us guidance that the ICERs will be available to college and institutions around January 31st. But I learned today that schools are likely to get ICERs earlier, potentially even before the holiday break. And so that is something unexpected. I'm not sure I believe it, but I think it's a good segue as we talk about all things enrollment management. We wouldn't be having a meaningful conversation if we weren't talking about the FAFSA and correcting the stress that took place last year.
Bryan, the reason why we wanted to talk to you today is to help share some of the success and some of the reasoning behind the initiative that you have at Hartwick College. So if you could please give us a background of that, and then after it, we have some specifics we would like to break down so our listeners can kind of learn from this wonderful project that you've been working on successfully.
Yeah, thank you so much, Troy. I want to first start and say Hartwick College is a really spectacular college, and it's just a really special place. And when I joined Hartwick College about a year and a half ago, I knew, given the challenges in the market, that it was going to be one of the more challenging roles that one could take on in the field of enrollment management. But that type of challenge is really, really exciting to me. And I really felt, and I still really feel, that Hartwick College is such a spectacular spectacular place that the world deserves to know about all that it has to offer. And so I think what we're going to talk about today really stems around a 3-year enrollment management strategic plan. And for me, this being my third institution that I've been at a significant leadership role, I've learned a lot. And it really enabled me to kind of hit the ground running and really form a 3-year plan with the full collaboration and support of the campus community, board members, faculty, staff, current students. And so these initiatives really stemmed from a bigger picture data-informed enrollment management strategy.
That's really exciting, Bryan. And I think one of the first questions that I would have, and especially as our listeners, would be like, what are some of those marketing things that and branding things that you're looking at as far as how that plays into that? And then how are you then kind of, rolling that out to be part of the bigger plan?
Yeah, well, I'll give our listeners a kind of inside enrollment management scoop. Year 2 of Hartwick's enrollment management plan has 5 key pillars. I'm going to briefly talk about the first 3 because I don't think that's the topic. But, number 1 pillar is cost containment, looking at our financial aid optimization strategy and making sure that we're leveraging our aid in a way that is going to produce the right size and shape and composition of class every year. The second pillar of the strategy focuses around product portfolio and really thinking about both the academic programs and the athletic programs that we need to maximize our enrollment and retention. The third pillar is territory expansion. As a regional private liberal arts college, we're well known and have done historically well, particularly in the upstate New York region. But thinking about new markets, not only domestically, but internationally, is a real huge pillar of our plan. But the last 2 pillars are the pillars that I think we're going to talk about during this podcast. And really, they focus on the very simple and important idea of offering a distinctive product at an affordable price. A distinctive product at an affordable price. And so pillar 4 is really thinking about our position in the market, our positioning. I don't like to use the word branding because branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room. I like to talk about positioning because that's our chance to put a stake in the ground and really look to help people define how they're going to talk about Hartwick. And then the last pillar is pricing. And we could talk a lot more about this in this conversation, but I don't have to tell 2 veterans like you just how important in today's challenging market, affordability is to our prospective students and families.
Well, let's talk about that because I think the heart of what we had prepared to talk about today is the fact that, part of this initiative, part of this, this what you're doing, year 2 of this 3-year plan is a tuition reset. And I know a lot of people are, some people hear that and they're not sure what that means, especially if you're not part of the private sector of higher education. I think it can kind of seem a little bit odd, and I think that's part of the confusion out there. And so maybe tell us a little bit about, your study and what you did to kind of prepare for that, and then maybe explain in simple terms, what is a tuition reset?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for many years, Hartwick, like many other regional private institutions, have engaged in what you would call a high price, high discount model, right? And so Hartwick College, when I arrived, tuition fees, room and board, and other miscellaneous expenses were a little over $70,000. But we were discounting at a very, very high rate. And oftentimes, I think a key stat in research is, 54% of families will look at a college's sticker price, and based on that sticker price alone, they'll decide not to apply because they don't really understand how it works, with merit scholarships and then federal grants, state grants, need-based aid. And so, that entire kind of confusing thing. Now, for decades, higher ed did really, really well with this high price, high discounting model, right? It's similar to if you look at like department stores, right? Macy's, Kohl's, JCPenney, they also do well by marking up their products and offering big sales. And institutions for decades, when the demographics were in their favor and when demand was in their favor, were able to year after year consistently raise their sticker price, oftentimes raise their discount without people knowing about it, but continue to not only enroll larger classes, but make sure that ensure that they either maintained or even grew their net tuition revenue per student. Over the last 7 or 8 years, though, there's been a major change or a shift. As you both know, we have major market challenges facing us. Our listeners have heard these things before, but I would sum them into 3 buckets: declining demographics, unsustainable tuition discounting rate, and change in consumer mindset around the value of higher education. And so the idea of a tuition reset is essentially lowering both your sticker price, but lowering your discount as well. And the goal of a tuition reset is to really attract more applicants, right? It's not a magic wand in and of itself, right? Just by lowering your price, you're not going to all of a sudden increase your enrollment. But the key is if you could pair a tuition reset with a repositioning, as we've done at Hartwick College, our research has found that, institutions that have attempted to do this just by lowering their price alone and going into the market and talking about price, isn't as compelling in the marketplace as those institutions that are able to, in a distinctive way, talk about their value proposition, which we're doing at Hartwick. And then as a pillar of that, we talk about our price transparency, our clear pricing. And, we're really just putting it to families and students and letting them know exactly what our costs are, exactly what they can afford to pay. And so far, it's being received really well. So I hope that helps, Bart. You think that helps for the listener? Yeah. Yeah.
I think that does, and I think it was very clearly articulated. Thank you, Bryan. One question that I want to follow up with that, because I heard you say, the data and some of the other analytic points that you looked at. What were those data points and some of the analysis that you did to kind of come to this decision, and how did you go about doing that? Because, a lot of people are probably thinking, yeah, I've got data, I've got this, but how did you, as an enrollment professional with your cabinet, come to that decision?
Yeah, I think there was both external and internal data that was really important to us. One, as you can imagine, we wanted to benchmark and look at what were other schools that tried tuition resets and what were their results. And the truth of the matter is that there is a growing body of research of institutions that have done resets. Most all of the research, though, is in a pre-COVID world. And the research in general is not incredibly in favor of institutions doing tuition resets. First and foremost, for institutions that are thinking about this, you can't do it without the investment of additional marketing dollars to get out in the market in a bold way to promote it. And so a lot of the research shows that institutions have invested a lot of additional money in year 1, maybe in year 2, but then over time there's a pulling back on that. And so institutions have seen an initial spike in applications, but then as time has gone by and they've continued to raise their price, year over year, there kind of becomes a regression to the mean, in terms of, that application number. So it's not like there's this overwhelming research about, how successful tuition resets have been. But part of what we talked about as a senior leadership team and as a board digested this data is we talked about, in a post-COVID world, how has the consumer mindset changed? And then we really got into the Hartwick data. And what I would say to other listeners out there is, I'm not a big believer in this idea of best practice. I don't particularly love that term, because I think what might be a best practice for Hartwick may not be a best practice for another institution. Every organization is different with its own unique nuances, financial needs, et cetera. And so you really need to adapt a strategy that is unique and customized to your institution. But I will tell you that at Hartwick, one of the pieces of data that we looked at very clearly was, who are we really competing with? And, the truth of the matter is, and I'm sure people will chuckle when hearing this, but there was a lot of misperceptions about who our competition is. People talked about Hamilton and Colgate and Bucknell, and I think at one point in Hartwick's history, those were our competitors. But the truth of the matter is now we're largely competing against the SUNY schools. And we actually have a very large SUNY school literally across the street from us. And so thinking about who we're competing against was really important. Doing an analysis of our sticker price versus their sticker price, our applicant pool versus their applicant pool, our yield versus their yield was really, really integral. And at Hartwick, again, And we feel like we have a huge opportunity. It's not that we have a bad reputation out there. It's just that we have a lack of awareness out there. Right. And so we felt that pairing our position as the Life Balance College with our really, terrific price and our low net cost for students was a great opportunity for us to not only get into new markets, as I talked about in the beginning, but frankly go head to head against the real big SUNY mindset that exists in the state of New York. One other thing, and I hope I'm not rambling too much here, but we thought about different pockets of populations that might be interested in Hartwick. And so something interesting, a lot of people think that when you do a reset that you're going to attract a lot more Pell eligible students as a private institution to apply. But the truth of the matter is regional private institutions for decades have been doing a great job with the highly needy families, right? And if you look at the percentage in the state of New York of highly needy families, they in large proportions do enroll at private institutions. The families that are in growing proportions going to the SUNY are actually the middle to the upper middle class families. So I want to kind of take you through a little scenario, or our listeners through a little scenario. This is an upper middle class family in the state of New York. They have a boat in the driveway. Their kids are involved in travel sports. They do their trip every year to Disney or wherever they want to go. And the families on paper, they make a good combined income as a dual earning family. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot of liquidity. These families look at these high sticker prices at these private institutions, and they're smart enough to know that when they fill out the FAFSA, they're not going to get a lot of assistance. They're going to be gapped in a really big way. And the only way they're going to pay for that gap is if they cash in their 401k, their 403b, or, they take out a second mortgage, or they take out loans. And it's really those families at Hartwick. We looked at that population. We really don't have a lot of those families in our funnel. And we feel that this lower price is really going to reduce debt for a lot of families, but particularly those families that have been gravitating towards the SUNYs. And we think we're going to be able to take some of that market share back.
I really like that. And before we move on to that next point, I just wanted to kind of point out a couple things to the listeners that Bryan covered a lot, which was great. But I think one thing that I wanted to say is that this is not just a one and done type of thing. I think there was a lot of thought with the data, but there were other things that happened with the positioning, with the messaging, with the way that it was talked about, the way that it was introduced, the way that those things happen. So if that's something that your institution's considering with the tuition reset, make sure that as a marketer, you're at the table and that you're talking about positioning, that you're talking about these things to support the enrollment team and the decisions. The other thing I wanted to point out was just this idea of who is our true competitor. I hear that so many times, Bryan, that especially some of the smaller faith-based, they think it's the next faith-based down the road, the next one. At the end of the day, it's really going to end up being the publics and the community colleges. I mean, that's across the board, or the couch, where it's just like, I'm just not going to do anything right now. And so I think that we need to kind of realistically look at it. Sometimes the cross apps will show you some stuff. Sometimes, admitted student research will show you some things. But I think you have to kind of help your institution break out of this mindset that the historical perception of who the competitors are might not necessarily be the true case today in our post-COVID world.
Yeah, and I'd like to add a couple things. I mean, one is, I move quickly. I talk quickly, I move quickly, I'm not afraid to act. But this initiative took 10 months. And by a lot of accounts, that's lightning fast. But 10 months is also a long period of time. And a couple key ingredients. One is I had a 50% partner in this. Gail Glover, our vice president of strategic communications, is one of my close friends, great colleague. And the two of us did this lock sync. I think that was a huge part of our success in being able to move so quickly that we were able to work so collaboratively together. But then we got the board in on this very early, sharing data, getting their feedback and support. We had our partners at EAB that does our financial aid optimization. We had our partners at Spark 451, which is our full service advertising agency that we work. They were in on this in the very beginning. Then we hired an external consultant that worked with our CFO, a tremendous statistician, Joel Polhouse. We couldn't have done this without him, who was working next to the CFO because the CFO had to be a huge partner, but we had to allow the CFO and her consultant to be kind of the skeptics and to be pushing back. And then the last thing that I think is so important that I want the audience to hear is that we had a group of economics faculty members at Hartwick College that were brought into this in a confidential manner very early on. 4 economics faculty members. I cued them in on my thinking. I shared the data. They produced data. They, as you could imagine, in a really healthy way, had lots of questions. They had concerns. We probably met, 5 or 6 times throughout the year. And at the end of the day, not only did they provide real insight that helped me shape the strategy, but when it came time to then presenting this to the campus community, doing our focus groups, doing our research, this group of economics faculty became our biggest champion. And when we unveiled this to the entire faculty, they already knew about it. They felt good about it. They felt the faculty were included. They had representation. And, I just can't tell you, if we hadn't done that, I'm almost certain that we would have had cynics and naysayers, and I would have had a lot of hassle and stress at the end of the day unveiling this.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, Bryan, with the tuition reset, can you share some of the challenges or expectations, some of the feedback you heard from your existing students and their families?
Yeah, Troy, you hit the nail right on the head. The fun part of doing this kind of positioning and pricing work is, talking with the school counselors and with the prospective families, and they've been terrific. I mean, the school counselor community is through the roof. The hard thing is you've got to explain this to your current students, and that was the most challenging part of this last September. So just 2 months ago, we actually, to all of our current students, provided them personal financial aid packages, a variable data brochure, both electronic and print, that explained to them in detail our new position as the Life Balance College, talked about our 4 pillars, talked about the financial well-being as the 4th pillar, and then we showed them 3 columns. The first is what they're currently paying, their tuition, their grants, their net costs, we had to do estimates of them, what their net cost would have been next year without the reset. And then the 3rd column showed them what their price would be with the reset. And then, of course, we had to put our money where our mouth is and make sure that for each of our students, they were saving on average of $1,000 to $1,500. And so we really needed to have some real money there to give those students, that type of reassurance. And still, with that said, it wasn't perfect. I mean, I certainly learned about some things that I would have done differently. And we had some students and families that called us up and they said, as you can imagine, well, I understand this net cost thing, but I want my scholarship. I like my big scholarship. And what's going to happen to my big scholarship? And so, we really had to take an approach of personal one-on-one conversations with current students and our financial aid counselors. The other really cool thing that helped us with this is while we unveiled this to our current students, we also unveiled this idea of the life balance credit, which was really, really popular. So we said to our current students, while the new prices for next year, starting right now this year, we created a menu of items related to our pillars, physical wellness, emotional wellness, academic wellness, that students can engage in if they do 3 of them in a semester, which are all good things that are going to help their engagement level and their retention. We would give them $250 life balance credit each semester. So we had this idea that, students and families could earn an additional $500 a year right away towards their bottom line, as part of, the whole Life Balance College. So it really helped to create some buy-in, and it really helped us kind of further put our money where our mouth is to our current students and families.
I love that. And help me understand, certainly that idea, we talked a little bit in the pre-interview about the fact that so many families come with their pencil sharpened to show, hey, what are you going to do for me? Here's the grades that we've had, here's the GPA, here's the tests, here's the activities that we've done. How do you how do you kind of deal with that messaging? Because I think that everybody, it's almost become an entitlement a little bit that, hey, if I do this well, I'm going to earn this into college.
I mean, we've been talking a lot about transparency. I mean, that's been a big buzzword, and just talking to families in a very down-to-earth way. And I've told families myself, listen, institutions engage in this high price, high discount model. These are not endowed scholarships. This is a discounting on institutional aid, and essentially, we've told families, we believe deeply in Hartwick as an institution. We want to attract more people to consider Hartwick. And in order to do this, we want to be more clear. $22,000 tuition and standard fees, scholarships up to $10,000. You could come and earn a Hartwick education, whether it be in nursing or a business, for as little as $12,000 in tuition and standard fees. And so I've said to families, you could go through this process of trying to play a guessing game and, get this $35,000 scholarship and then wonder, in February or March what your bottom line is be. Or, we could just tell you what your bottom line is and kind of demystify this entire game. And, you could strongly consider Hartwick right alongside of some of the, not only the finest private institutions, but in a lot of cases, we're going to beat the local SUNY school too. Yeah. And I'm not afraid to say that either. SUNY is not afraid to compete with other institutions. They put billboards up in New Jersey and we'll match Rutgers, and they put billboards up in New Hampshire. We'll match the University of New Hampshire. But somehow the small privates were afraid. We don't want to ruffle the feathers of SUNY, but SUNY is going to be just fine. The governor of the state of New York, it's a great system. They offer great education, but nobody in the legislature in the state of New York is lobbying, to my knowledge, for the small regional private institutions. So we've got to take care of ourselves and band together. And I encourage other small private institutions to come on board and let's go at it.
Yeah, I love that, because I remember back in the day, and I'm going to show my age here. Back in the day, I purchased 3 Saturn cars. And if you don't know what Saturn was a car company that came out and said, we are going to put a sticker price, and the sticker price is the sticker price. There's no negotiating, because everybody, you either love it or you hate it, going to buy a new car and having to play the game of, well, let me go check with my manager. And I think that this reminds me of that. And I always appreciated that. It was clear, and it just took away a lot of the heartache going into those dealerships. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and my background's in international enrollment management is where I started my career, and it's been resonating really well in our key international markets as well. Nepal, India, Zimbabwe, South Korea, they get it. Cut through the BS. Every international student is guaranteed $10,000 scholarship, $12,000 tuition and fees. Let's rock and roll. People like it. People like it. Yeah.
Bryan, we do appreciate you taking us through that tuition reset conversation, and I would encourage any of our listeners to reach out to you directly if they would like to hear more about it. But for our conversation, I would like to change the topic to athletics. So you are not only the VP for Enrollment Management, but also athletics at Hartwick. So would like to know how you see how athletics plays a role in either enrollment increase or retention.
Yeah, it's everything, Troy. And first of all, my background is, I love sports. I have a master's degree in athletic counseling from Springfield College. I've always been hugely into athletics, and I've been following the role that athletics has played in reshaping market positions of college and universities for the last 40 years. Maybe that's a different podcast. Really deeply into NIL and how that's shaping the landscape. But when I got to Hartwick, I noticed a couple things. One is, I love data. And in thinking about our data, a third of our students are student athletes. But when I started looking at the retention data and I started looking at our graduation data, I noticed this positive trend that our student athletes they're yielding at a higher rate. They're enrolling at a greater numbers. They're retaining at better rates. They're living in our residence halls. They're contributing to a really vibrant campus. Not that our other students aren't, but our student athletes are really the lifeblood of our campus in a lot of ways. Talking to our alum, athletics is just such an important part of Hartwick College's history. And athletics and enrollment were completely separate when I arrived. And there wasn't a lot of good communication and collaboration. And I noticed the talent level of the coaches and the assistant coaches in the athletic department, what good recruiters they were, what good ideas they had, what successful teams they had. And so I simply said, like, if we're going to really do this, if we're going to be really bold and we're going to put together a comprehensive enrollment and retention plan, we've got to really think about combining, our admissions, our retention, and our athletic efforts. And that's what we did. And so now we're all one unit. We have a great new athletic director in Paul Vecchio, our executive director of athletics. He has a direct line to the president and our VP of advancement on a lot of fundraising. But we're really clear on what we're trying to accomplish when we talk about roster management. And this also took a year of data and research and culture building. But at the end of the day, I want our audience to think about three really important things when it comes to roster management. Number one, setting clear, tangible enrollment targets for their coaches where they know what the targets are, admissions knows what the target are, and there has to be accountability to meet them. Two is retention targets. There has to be, same thing, clear retention targets. The coaches have to meet them. And then third is we've got to talk about winning and how important it is. And when you accomplish 1 and 2, actually winning becomes easier, but they all feed into each other. And so, again, I like to try to, you've heard me use this word pillar before. I like to have these pillars. I like to have 3 clear points that we talk about. And that's how I talk about roster management with the athletic director and with the coaches when we talk about expectations at Hartwick.
I love that because I think a lot of schools are stuck in this area, and you've probably experienced it too, Bryan, and in the sense that in some ways, if, especially schools that have 50, 60, 70%, athletes, they've gone to, let's get a lacrosse program, let's get women's wrestling. They're looking at every program to continue to grow that enrollment through athletics, which I think is a really good strategy. But at the same time, there's challenges, and I love the fact that you guys have put it all under kind of one pillar, because I think that the challenge is sometimes when enrollment doesn't have much say and athletics is over here, you get this tug of war that a lot of times ends up in either mission drift or students who aren't a good fit. That gets exponentially harder at some schools that maybe have different types of requirements, whether it be academic or whether it be faith types of things like that. And so I love the fact that you've done that. Was that a big change, and how did that initially kind of go down? Or is that something that's always been a part of at Hartwick?
No, it was a little bit of a shift. It really came about. We had an athletic director. He found another opportunity and moved on by his own choice. So it really started with a vacancy, and that's when I said to the president, "This is the perfect opportunity for a realignment." And so that was kind of the impetus. But there were some real key tactical elements that became very appealing to the senior leadership team and the board, and frankly the athletic staff as well. Which is, let's talk about hardcore recruitment. And let's talk about things like, in the state of New York, we have for exempt employees, a minimum salary requirement, which is quite high. And so it becomes very expensive for college and universities to have large teams of full-time admissions recruiters. And so we all of a sudden started thinking about who are some of our best recruiters on campus. It's really our assistant coaches and our coaches who've been doing it for years. Very frankly, we have a great admissions team, but our athletic staff had greater longevity, they had greater institutional familiarity, and they had this ethic or this ethos of just kind of rolling up your sleeves and getting it done, right? To fill their rosters. And at the same time, obviously they were interested in thinking about creative ways for them to make more money. And so just to give you some examples of some results that have happened, one of our assistant head football coaches, who was just with me this afternoon for our event, he became a full-time assistant director of admissions. He was able to retain his position as an assistant football coach, but now he's out on the road in one of our key markets, and he's a really, really terrific recruiter. Our women's head tennis coach, who our women's tennis team just won the Empire 8 championship. She won the Empire 8 Coach of the Year. She's a phenomenal head tennis coach, but now during her off season, she's going to be working 12 hours a week. She's going to be helping us to integrate our front rush CRM and our Slate CRM, helping us create an athletic dashboard in Slate. And then she's going to do some office hours in the Welcome Center because she's such a good recruiter.
That's great.
We want her not only working with prospective tennis, players, but we want her meeting all of our families and going out there and chatting. And so she's happy. The admission staff is happy. It's allowed us to naturally refine some of our athletic recruitment events, our overnight programs. So there's just been all kinds of synergy. And the athletic coaches have learned a lot more about things like financial aid and territory management and, data, how we look at enrollment data. So it's been a real win-win.
I love that. I love that story. Yeah. I mean, I love the win-win story because it doesn't always end up that way. And when it's in the natural, separation, there can be a lot of stress and tension between the two teams. So I love the fact that you brought those together. Excellent.
And I would caution. I'm not sure that every VP of enrollment management, could just jump into athletics. But I think there has to be a passion there, and I really do love athletics. I love being around the student athletes. I love being at the games, and none of this stuff happens easily. It probably took me 8 or 9 months to even earn a little bit of the coach's trust. And
right.
I laugh to myself. One of the hardest meetings I've ever ran in my entire life. And, I've done consulting work with boards. I've done board presentations, was the first department meeting for the athletic coaches and the assistant coaches that took place 8 or 9 months ago. And I walked into that room and I saw these faces look at me like, who is this guy? And what is this guy going to tell us? And we can't wait for him to shut up. And, I probably never felt so insecure in my life, but, you gotta build that trust,
Good work. Good work.
Yeah.
So to close out our conversation, we would like to ask you if there is a specific final tip or maybe a piece of advice that would help our listeners take action right away.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's kind of funny, part of my advice is to balance, of course, wanting to do your research, wanting to, make sure that you have the right people, on the bus and that you're, really collaborating. That's kind of the area of my doctoral research was about collaboration. So that's huge. But at some point, you've got to take action, right? Especially if you're a regional public or private institution in these challenging days. The one thing that I could promise, and everyone knows this, is doing the same old thing over and over again is not going to bear different results in this market. So at some point, you've got to take action. You've got to be willing to fail. You're going to make mistakes. I like this idea of fail fast, fail hard, learn from your mistakes, and move on. But, to be an enrollment manager in today's market, you've got to be bold. You've got to sometimes act quick. And I would say the last thing is I've underestimated throughout my career how meaningful it is for campus communities to hear what your vision is. And so I really try so hard, whether it be during a community conversation, a staff meeting, a board meeting, to be really intentional with my words and to let people know, here is my vision. This is what my vision is, whether it's my vision for the long-term plan or whether it's my vision, for the month ahead or my vision for how the day is going to go. I just think that when you're intentional about sharing with people what your vision is, it really helps people understand what you're trying to accomplish, and then it helps them to decide whether they're going to be a part of your being a positive agent for change.
That's great. Love it.
Everyone, again, we've been talking to Dr. Bryan Gross, who is the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Athletics at Hartwick College. Also, he is the host of Visionary Voices, a podcast that is all about college presidents, and I believe it's subtitled The College President's Playbook. Bryan, thank you so much for the wisdom that you shared with our listeners. And for those who would like to connect with you further, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, thank you so much for that shout out. Definitely connect me with on LinkedIn. For my fellow enrollment management colleagues out there, I've already talked to a number of folks who've seen us in the media. Definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me an email. I'd be happy to get together and chat. And thanks for the plug on my podcast on the Enrollify network. Definitely give that a listen as well.
We encourage that very much so. So again, thank you, Bryan. And Bart, do you have any final comments or any final comments that you would like to add?
Yeah, I really just want to kind of encourage everyone. You might want to go back and just kind of listen to a couple of little things again. I think that there's a lot of talk these days, especially if you're in private. There's a lot of talk about tuition reset, a lot of talk about, how are we going to survive the enrollment cliff? There's a lot of challenges. And so there are some things in this podcast, even if you say, look, Bart, I'm just the director of marketing, or I stick in my lane. You've got to really think this stuff through. You've got to be participating in helping your institution take action to really prepare things. And so if you found some things in this very helpful, or some ideas that you're like, I need to know more about that, reach out to Bryan, reach out to myself, reach out to Troy. We'd love to talk to you more about those things. But I just want to encourage you that these are the things that are going to make a big difference and are going to make our institutions healthier. They're going to be transparent, and you're going to attract students with that type of effort. And so a lot of creativity going on at Hartwick. Really appreciate it, Bryan, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Have a great day. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
To our listeners, we want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. And if anything that you've heard today has been helpful, please consider rating us, leaving a comment or a review, and definitely subscribing. The Higher Ed Marketer Podcast is sponsored by Kaler Solutions, your go-to partner for higher ed mission-fit marketing strategies, enrollment, and branding needs. And by Ring Digital, your ad targeting people. With our powerful technology, we ensure your message connects with the right audience to maximize impact. On behalf of Dr. Gross, Bart, and myself, thank you so much for joining us.